guys. We are finishing up chapter 7 with the very last verse and beginning chapter 8 of the Gospel of John. And so, if you've been following along, here we have everyone going home from the temple. And it's been quite a long day here. Most recently, the Pharisees and the religious authorities have used all their best attempts to rid the temple of Jesus. They have very prominently displayed their strong prejudices in the treatment of the temple guards or the officers who they had sent to pick up Jesus and arrest him, toward the crowd who was mostly believing, and toward Nicodemus, who had questioned their gross hypocrisy. So we see their prejudice in all of those things in the last passage. And so now in verse 53, everyone goes home. Show's over, right? But it says that Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and we're not really told why. This was just a couple miles away from the temple, and so maybe he went to be alone to pray. We know he did that. And maybe he didn't really have any friends within the city, or maybe he simply wouldn't trust those who were there. We don't really know, but what we do know is at the break of dawn, that bad boy's right back at the temple teaching again. So imagine that. I mean, let's really think about this because I think it's important. Despite the vicious abuse, the strong level of persecution, and even the attempted arrests made toward him, Jesus Christ continues to go to the temple and teach there. And so the question is why? Why would someone go to a place continually where they knew the in-chargiest people did not want them? Yes, I made up that word. In fact, the in-chargiest people did not want them so much that they tried 6 ways from Sunday to destroy him. Why keep going there, right? Why not find a new teaching town? Well, Jesus had a job to do. Jesus had been sent by the Father to his Father's house. He couldn't just leave because certain people who happened to have certain positions didn't like him. That would have made him a pushover. It would have made him a pansy and a poor excuse for a leader, because only people who are poor in leadership leave when the going gets tough, right? Good leaders don't leave when they're being persecuted. Good leaders plant their stake and press on in faithfulness until their work is complete and their call is fulfilled, no matter how many power-hungry bullies show up to push them around on the playground, right? So that's where we are. So Jesus stays. He keeps right on coming to the temple. He keeps right on teaching. He keeps right on sitting with his friends and being who he is. He keeps showing them how to live and what it's going to take in order to follow him. And then just then, the Pharisees show back up. So here we go again, right? This time, the religious men bring in a woman who had been sleeping around. They tell Jesus that the law, the one they made up themselves and don't ever follow when it pertains to them, that law, commands that she be stoned. Oh, really? Jesus should have said, "Tell me more about how little you know about your own law." How about a little history lesson before we move on here? Moses had not commanded a woman such as this to be stoned. Mosaic law said this: if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Leviticus 20:10 and Deuteronomy 22:22. So did you catch that? First off, it did not specify how the adulterers were to die, just that they were to be put to death. And secondly, and more importantly, it said both the woman and the man were to face the judgment. So where was the dude, right? Where was he? Guess these guys just never get tired of twisting the law to make it more convenient for themselves. And how do these guys even know that she did this, right? Could it have been with one of them? I would bet money on that. But regardless, why does the woman stand to suffer while the man, who is equally guilty, gets to go free and have his identity kept secret? That's the question we need to ask of these guys, right? I know why, though. Because it wasn't about adultery. It wasn't about God's law. It wasn't about anyone's sin at all. These men were more full of sin than anyone. It wasn't about justice or who was right and who was wrong or what any person in the kingdom of the Jewish religious leaders was doing at all. It was never, ever about that. None of these instances were about the sin. It wasn't about that. It was about them being the big bosses who got to throw their weight around without any accountability. That's what this was about. It was about ridding the world of a guy who would side with such a person so that she might learn a better way of life. It was about destroying Jesus so that they wouldn't have to confess their own sin, because I bet they knew how much greater it was than hers. And they couldn't bear the thought of any of their high-profile friends who thought they were so perfect finding out. It was about a power struggle between them and the very God of the universe. And so our Savior shows up, and with a simple act, he sides with the sinner and proves them all wrong. And doesn't he always? How the Lord loves us. How he loves us when all the voices in all the world are screaming out about your unforgivable sin status. Jesus is stooping down and asking who of them is clean enough to throw even one stone. And the answer is no one. Not one. So stop thinking yourself so superior simply because your sin isn't always as seen as someone else's. Maybe you can hide it better. But Jesus sees it, and he knows that neither you nor I will ever be worthy to throw even one stone at anyone else. Consider that. We need to consider that. Because even when the one who sought to kill and destroy Jesus with all their malice and deceit came out bringing this woman, this sinner, when Jesus did what he did and sided with her, they all started to turn around and they all walked away when he said this. Every single one of them. Everyone. So consider that. So the public spectacle is over, and she, the very exposed sinner, is left alone with Jesus. She's left alone with Jesus. And I think that's just what she needed, because no one else really wanted her anyway. No one else really loved her. No one else thought she was worth much of anything. And she wasn't really the kind of girl that the temple wives would ever even talk to. She just stands there with her Savior, and he talks to her. He says she's not condemned. He says that he does not condemn her, and he makes sure she understands that there's not one single person in all the world who is worthy to do so. And if there were, it would be him and him alone. And then he tells her not to sin again. And I just think that's beautiful, because you gotta put yourself in her shoes. You gotta imagine how this woman felt. Just put yourself in her shoes for just a second. I know it's hard because you don't understand, I guess, unless you've been there. And we all think ourselves so much better than someone who sins in a way that we don't think that we ever would. But sometimes sin does sneak up on us and surprise even our own selves about how sinful we can really be. But she's the reason. When we ask the question, why did he keep coming back to a place where he wasn't wanted by the most prestigious rulers? She's the reason. She's the reason that Jesus kept coming back to the temple where the religious rulers hated him. She's the reason that he had to be there. She's the reason that he stuck around. She's the reason that he came down and slept in a manger and sacrificed the celestial and submitted to servitude and washed feet and said, "Forgive them, Father," and sang a song of forgiveness over all the world. She's the reason. She's the reason he doesn't remove his lampstand when religious places are run by people like these men. She's the reason that his spirit still comes and still works and still moves. And so are you. So are you. You, alcohol drinker. You, pornography watcher. You, heroin addict. You, religious stone thrower. You, sleep arounder. You, family leaver. You, orphan child. You, suicide planner. You, white-collar thief. You, blue-collar worker. You, atheist. You, authority abuser. You, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of you. That's why he stayed. That's why he came. He came for you and for me. And don't ever, ever let anyone tell you anything different just because they have some kind of position. Don't ever do that. Because you're not outside of grace. I don't care who you are or what you've done. You belong in his house. Yes, you do. Doesn't matter what anyone else says. You're not outside of grace. And you were the reason that Jesus kept coming back to his Father's house when none of the right people really wanted him there. You're the reason. And so remember that, because there's nothing truer that's ever been said. Jesus did not come to condemn the world. He came to save it. So stop condemning sinners in your assemblies. Stop throwing stones at those who haven't met the Savior yet. Stop passing judgment on people who have done things you have deemed unforgivable. Stop avoiding the sick when you say you're in the service of the great physician. It doesn't even make any sense. He didn't come to heal the healthy. He came to stoop down and write in the sand and rescue the sick and give salvation. The church, we got to see this. This is our Savior. He doesn't dislike the people that you avoid. He doesn't condemn the people that you don't prefer. He loves his children, every single one of them, and that's what we are. So stoop down or start walking. That's the choice our Savior gives us when we encounter someone who's caught in sin. Notice, stone throwing is not an option. So, I think it's important to consider these things in all seriousness, because we have got a lot going on in our day and age with these very issues. So, I hope that's helpful. I hope you can see our Savior a little bit better after listening and reading through this passage. And I hope that you guys have a good night. I had to do this little lesson early because I will not be available tomorrow morning. Wish me luck on my police academy entrance test. I'm very nervous and I can't say for sure that I'm going to pass, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So pray for me and I'll pray for you. Thanks for listening.